Nobody had touched me on purpose in 3 years, not since my mother died. They straightened my collar without touching skin. They guided me through doorways with a hand that hovered an inch off my shoulder blade. My father's ministers bowed before they spoke to me, and by the time they'd finished bowing, whatever they'd meant to say had gone formal and careful in their mouths, like bread left out too long. I was Princess Elira Vantha, second of that name, and I had grown very good at being handled and very bad at being known. The East Garden had been dead for longer than I could remember. Court botanists came twice a year, looked at the cracked beds and the black canes on the old rose hedge, wrote something on a clipboard and left. Nobody expected anything to grow there. So when my father's steward told me a new groundskeeper had been assigned to it, a human woman, hired off a labor contract from some green little world, on account of humans having an odd, stubborn talent with soil that our own people had never bothered to cultivate, I didn't think of it at all. Gardeners came and went. This one would go too. I saw her the first week, on my afternoon walk, kneeling in the wreck of the hedge with her sleeves pushed up past her elbows. She was maybe 60, gray-haired, sun-spotted, built like someone who had spent a life doing things with her hands, rather than having things done for her. She didn't stand when she saw me. She glanced up, said afternoon, the way you'd say it to anyone crossing your patch of dirt, and went back to cutting deadwood out of the hedge with a pair of shears that had clearly been sharpened 1,000 times. I heard, later, that the head steward found her that same evening and told her plainly, "You do not address Her Highness. You bow your head and let her pass. You do not speak first." I only knew this because she told me herself, months on, laughing about it. Man near choked on his own collar telling me that. She said she'd nodded and gone back to work, and then talked to me again the very next day anyway. Because, in her words, you looked like you hadn't had a real conversation since you were in diapers, and that's not a decent way to raise anybody, princess or not. Her name was Rosalind Cade. She told me to call her Roz. Nobody had ever told me to call them anything but their full formal title, and here was a woman who'd cut her own name down to 1 syllable and handed it to me like it was nothing. I should say the head steward did not let the matter rest with one warning. He came back a second time, and a third, each visit stiffer than the last, reminding her of the correct forms of address, the correct distance to keep, the correct way to lower her eyes when the second of House Vantha passed. He even threatened, on the third visit, to have her contract reassigned to the hangar yards, where she would tend machines instead of people and never see me again. I only learned of this much later, from one of the undergardeners, who told it like a piece of gossip he still found funny. Roz had apparently listened to the whole threat without putting down her shears, and when he finished, she'd said, "Do what you like with the contract. I'll still say good morning to a lonely child if I see one in my garden," and gone back to cutting deadwood, and that had been the end of it, because nobody higher up ever confirmed the reassignment, and I have always suspected my father heard of the threat and quietly let it die. The second week, she put a trowel in my hand. I remember staring at it. It was old, wooden-handled, the metal worn silver bright from use. "You're not doing anything," she said, not unkindly, "and I've got 40 feet of bed to turn before the frost. Get down here, girl, and dig where I tell you." Girl. Nobody had called me girl since I could walk. I dug where she told me. My father would have been horrified. The second of House Vantha, kneeling in dirt in an old garden shirt Ross found for me, breaking her advice about soil density with the flat side of the trowel because I did it wrong and had to be shown twice. She showed me twice. She didn't sigh. She didn't call for a physician to check my hands after. She just showed me again, the same patient way, and when I finally got it right she said, "There, now you know something," and moved on to the next bed, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, because to her it was. That became the shape of my afternoons. I'd come down after my lessons, change into the shirt she kept folded on a shelf in the tool shed for me, and we would work. She taught me to deadhead the roses, snip above the first full leaf, angle the cut so the water runs off instead of pooling and rotting the stem. She taught me which weeds pulled clean and which needed a fork to loosen the root first, and how to tell a healthy root from a rotten one by smell alone, which she said took her 20 years to learn and me 3 afternoons, on account of you actually paying attention, which is rarer than you'd think. She talked while we worked, plainly, about her own daughter grown and living 3 systems over, about a husband dead 11 years now of a lung sickness no physician back home could cure, about a public garden she'd tended for 30 years on her home world, before a labor contract brought her out here for better pay. She never asked about my mother. I told her anyway, one afternoon, kneeling in the dirt with my hands full of couch grass roots, and she just listened, and when I was done she said, "That's a hard thing to carry, and I'm sorry for it," and handed me the fork so I'd have something to do with my hands while I finished crying. and never once suggested I stop. At midday, she ate her lunch sitting on an overturned crate by the shed, plain bread and hard cheese wrapped in cloth, and after the first month she simply started packing a second portion without asking whether I wanted one, and I simply started eating it without asking whether I was allowed. Nobody at court would have believed it. The second of House Vantha, sitting on a crate in a borrowed shirt, eating bread with her hands, arguing about whether the far bed needed thinning before the frost came. It was the plainest hour of my day, and for a long time it was the only hour that felt entirely mine. By spring, the black canes on the old hedge had gone green at the tips. Nobody had expected that. The court botanists had condemned that hedge as dead wood 4 years running. Ross had simply cut it back hard, fed the roots, and waited, the way you wait for anything that's been neglected a long time to remember how to grow. My father found us there on the morning the first buds opened, myself and Ross, both filthy to the elbow, arguing cheerfully about whether the far bed needed thinning, my hair coming loose from its pins, and a smear of soil across my jaw that nobody had rushed to wipe away. I saw the head steward's face over his shoulder, already composing the apology he meant to make for the state of me. My father didn't say anything for a long moment. He looked at the hedge, green and budding where it had been black and dead. He looked at me, laughing, with dirt under my nails. Then he looked at Ross, who met his eyes plainly, and didn't apologize for any of it, because in her mind, there was nothing to apologize for. "You've done something to my daughter's garden," he said finally. "Turn some soil is all," Ross said. "Girl did most of it herself, once she stopped being scared of getting dirty." He didn't offer her a title. She wouldn't have taken one. She told me so later, that evening, scrubbing dirt from under her nails at the shed sink. "I've got a contract and a garden and a girl who finally talks like a person instead of a plaque. That's plenty. Don't need a medal for doing what anybody decent would have done." He didn't press it. He simply never sent word that the arrangement should end. My afternoons in the East Garden continued, unremarked upon, unofficial, exactly as they'd been before he found us, which was, I came to understand, its own kind of blessing, the kind that doesn't need announcing to be real. I am grown now, and the East Garden is the finest in the palace grounds, and Rose still works it, slower these days but no less exacting about the angle of a pruning cut. I still go down most afternoons. She still calls me girl, though I've long since stopped being one, and I have never once corrected her, because it was the first true thing anyone ever called me, and I intend to keep it.